Beneath sub-level Gamma was a door that was never meant to be opened, but today, on the last turn of the stairs, the air made a sound like steel whispering its own secret. For lead editor Cyrus Anil of the Administratum Memoriam Archive, it should have been just another day, until he saw a hairline crack crawling through the wax seal on record bank frame 0L13. Subject: Unclassified Death Record, Forbidden Cabinet A. When he placed his hand on the lock, cold pierced straight to the bone. A faint throb came from inside, not paper, something else. In the silence of the archive, he could hear the far-off rumble of autocoilers, like a machine deep below turning in its sleep. The cabinet opened. No paper inside. A scroll made of flesh-like membrane hung there, its words rising and fading. The label changed itself, reshaping its language to match Cyrus's own childhood script. He should have filed a report, but he didn't. Something was taking root inside him. If he wrote the truth now, everything after might turn into a lie. By regulation, any biological document had to be queued for incineration before reading. But a drop of shining fluid on the edge caught his eye. In it, a reflection stared back. Another archivist, somewhere else, watching him. Both froze. The reflection made a gesture he knew. The mark used before a soul audit seal. That seal was never placed on living beings. So what was this thing that wasn't paper, and still being counted among the living? The file number shifted from 0L13 to 0L1, a countdown. Archive ledgers never shrink. Deaths only increase. Dust whispered from the shelves. The wall emblem turned its twin-edged gaze straight on his hand. The clock ticked backward. Fear shook him, and the trembling gave him courage. He touched the edge of the membrane. The skin separated, showing mechanical fibers underneath. Words appeared. Witness delayed. Verdict unresolved. Action suspended. That meant some world's death order had been halted. Files close after extinction, never before. If death had paused, who had the power to stop it? A hidden entry surfaced. Zero Bureau. He'd only heard of it, a mythic unit said to change decisions before they were made. When he read the timestamp, it reversed into his own birth date. Patterns clicked together. Every time Cyrus archived a record, somewhere else a death count moved backward. He was unknowingly rowing upstream in time. Footsteps echoed down the hall, forming and erasing themselves. He tried to close the scroll, but it clung to his hand. Firm, official, possessive. He understood. It didn't want to be filed. It wanted to take him along. In the archive, anything that calls itself a file but isn't one is either a key or a lock. You can't flee. You have to turn it the right way. Beneath the membrane, tiny print read, "Incomplete pattern. Awaiting signature." The script style belonged only to the field of judgment, where planetary verdicts are sealed. Who was holding back the signature? Using a red thermal device, he viewed the lower layers. The text changed. Now a map. Tunnels under the archive, a numbered maze, except one pulsating chamber without a label. He descended the wooden stairs. Each step changed the air's taste. Sterile above, sweet and heavy below. At the bend, he saw a door, marked only by a glowing line that the skin could sense before the eye. His palm itched. The door was reading him. The room beyond wasn't archive, lab, or chapel, something between. Frames on the walls held living pictures that breathed. In the center, a basin of water flowed downward instead of up. Names drifted on the surface, names of the dead already sealed above. Someone down here was rewriting fate. A shape appeared, humanoid, woven of fibers and light, as if a body carved from sacred code. It didn't speak. The room spoke for it. Meaning flooded his mind. Zero Bureau is real, but not as told. It doesn't block true decrees. It cancels false ones before they harden. When the upper scribes mix fear into law, the Bureau removes it. But something had gone wrong. The fatigue of those above had seeped into the system. Fatigue has no algorithm. It breaks the spine of writing. Paper had given up and turned to flesh. On the water's skin appeared the name of a world scheduled for erasure. The wall pulsed. The upper offices had reopened the case, now adding not just death seals, but memory seals, meant to erase every trace of that world's story. Cyrus felt hollow, as if his own life were being unwritten. The presence stirred the water, rearranging the letters into a new world's name. Up above, someone was rewriting reality. Below, the Bureau balanced it, plus and minus. He scratched a tiny mark on the table's edge. Waves formed, showing clips from old archives. He saw himself, or versions of himself, lightening the ink on seals. Sometimes saving a word, sometimes erasing it. He realized he was not just a scribe, but the axis on which pens aligned. Chains rattled behind the wall. Light splashed. The synchronization was failing. Someone upstairs had triggered collapse protocols. The presence finally met his eyes. No mercy, just necessity. Its voice filled the room. Only a fresh hand can fight decay. Cyrus opened his palm. A faint, unregistered seal glowed there. His key, maybe from birth, maybe from an old mistake. He pressed his palm to the water. Every frame changed, showing the world whose end had been delayed. Children wrote names in dust, never listed in any ledger. Old women pressed handprints of the same clay as his skin. Two realms connected. The Bureau's hum rose and a pact forming. If exhaustion becomes law, youth must become tradition. He lifted his hand. A secret path appeared on the water. A map back upward. Not an exit, a return. He had to go back and rewrite the tired lines. Breaking protocol didn't matter. The room laid its weight on his mark. He carried two seals now, the Bureau's and the Archives, on one skin. At the tunnel mouth stood a shadow, his own reflection from the scroll, now real. It was the version of him who had never descended. The other raised a hand, asking permission to go above and do what the lower one intended. They locked eyes. The moment was clean. Cyrus nodded. The shadow merged with him. One man, two memories. Upstairs, the archive had changed. Tables leaned toward him, as if waiting for the hand that writes. Censor saw the unlisted mark on his palm, but dismissed it as an old scar. He pulled the same file the water had shown. The ink was gone, replaced by powdered light. He dipped his pen and wrote in the margin, "Fatigue is a penalty, not a law." The words fit no statute, but written under the seal in light, they bent conscience itself. The page yielded. The decree rewrote itself. The autocoilers rumbled, asking, "How much did you change?" He marked 3 more files. Each line trembled less than the last. The warning charts stayed stable. The Bureau's heart below beat quietly, safe from detection. At the 20th file, a cold draft rose from the floor. A crack opened in the wall, leaking soft wax light. A sign the Bureau had opened a corridor upward. Through that passage, undecided rulings would now slow down, tapping first instead of crashing through. He touched the edge with his seal, a fingerprint checkpoint for conscience. The backward-moving clock finally ran true. Staff might have noticed, but said nothing. The archive creaked like an old tree stretching. Cyrus felt his palm mark deepen, not fade, as if responsibility had to weigh more before it could lift. He closed his pen box and shut his eyes. Behind them, the lower chamber glowed softly. The presence sent a wave of approval. The next turn isn't yours. It's for those who feel without seeing. Dust fell like rain, mixing with the light powder to form tiny stars. One landed on his hand. Inside it, a vision. A child under a red sky writing his name in dust, that name appearing on the master list for the first time. Sometimes lists become human when written by a living hand, not a weary one. Cyrus felt not faith, but calm. The work wasn't finished, but the path existed. The outer steps trembled. Someone from above had arrived. Questions would come, but for once the answer was visible on his palm. Canceling the law of fatigue wasn't a crime. It was rebellion against silent cruelty. Rebellion sometimes turns paper to flesh, and flesh to living law. Cyrus stepped toward the door. Whoever waited outside would, for the first time, see what the archive truly held. That decisions are made not only by seals, but by the intent of the hand that writes. The path's turns weren't over, but the great circle was complete. Below, the chamber's heartbeat steadied. Above, the clock kept honest time. Between them, one palm felt its seal deepen. More turns would come every 2 minutes, but now each carried a quiet defiance that would never let weariness become law again. He looked once more at the scroll. Pure writing now, no flesh. Truth doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just subtracts one false number. And for the first time, the archive's silence heard that thought. Less can be more, if the hand isn't tired. The lights above sublevel gamma shifted color, and the air in the archive glinted, then held still like someone held their breath. When Cyrus Anil stepped through the doorway, there was no paper smell, just the bite of fresh-cut metal with a faint chemical calm. A sealing lens tried to read the unregistered seal on his palm, failed, and quietly downgraded itself, logging the mark as an old scratch. Small win, one tiny ripple in the big accounting pool. Then a crate slid out of shelf 9 by itself, no request on file. Its surface wasn't lined like usual. It shimmered with fine clay-like waves. Cyrus set his palm on the clasp, the powdered light he uses as ink soaked in, and the lid steadied. Inside wasn't paper, but a stone tablet, its carving still wet-looking. It wasn't a doomsday decree, more like a ledger where 2 opposing columns lifted each other, loss on one side, gain on the other. The same strange counterflow he'd seen in the lower room. A thin line on the edge read, "If fatigue becomes law, history rewrites itself from below." He realized the heavy strokes from above were warping the record, and the Zero Bureau was the last flex keeping the line straight. A bell rang early, the surprise night inspection. A higher auditor was coming, the kind who weighs moisture in lists and heat in ink. Cyrus tried to close the crate. It refused, as if saying it's safer shown than hidden. 2 skull drones swept in, but when their sensors hit his palm seal, their lights went colorless. They looped and left, a blessing and a warning. Blind patrols are followed by harder ones. The deep patrol arrived with the seal of auditorium peerage at the door. Rare. They judged not just the words, but the tone and the writer's heartbeat. Cyrus thought of running, then remembered the lower room's lesson. Don't flee. Change the flow. He pressed his palm to the tablet, its numbers reordered, like shaking a soul awake. The auditor entered. Few badges, sharp eyes. The wall clock nudged itself forward. Time, for once, straightened. On the tablet, one figure turned. The net stayed the same, but the voice of the math gentled. A vein eased on the auditor's forehead. Tiny, but it's the lip where decisions slip back into being human. A hidden slot behind the tablet held a small brass coin. Not money, a reference. It bore an unregistered stamp used on memory, not currency. It meant today's plan wasn't just fire, but forgetting, pulling a world story so no one tomorrow could even know what happened. The coin's chills sank into his mind, and the secret corridor he'd seen in water flashed there. He put the coin back, but left a trace, like slowing a hidden flywheel. Across the hall, a junior scribe's pen shed a pinch of light powder. On his margin appeared half a sentence, the same one Cyrus had written. Fatigue is a penalty, not a law. The scribe hadn't written it, the hand had. Not infection, infusion. The lower room's pulse was no longer in one palm. It was nudging shoulders that hold pens. The auditor's gaze passed over the kid, didn't stick. The tone shift was still too fine for eyes. Only skin could feel it. The floor trembled. Shelf 15 pushed out the old black war book, never dusted with light, only stamped in black. Bad omen. It opened like tired arteries taking air. Inside were names set for next week, pre-written kill orders. The last line was a gap, waiting for a gentler third hand. Cyrus brought his seal close and dotted a grain of light. A dot isn't a letter, but it changes how letters move. The book shut and slid back. The auditor saw it, but his face stayed eased. The powder had worked without a sound. Up in the glass rooms, someone jostled the big fatigue pile. Counter windows flipped, some files deferred to saved, some saved to deferred. But this time you could feel a human weight in the sequence, not a machine's. Cyrus sensed a soft clause added to the Zero Bureau's script. Maybe someone had read the margin line. The auditor spun a small audit rod that weighs memory coins too. The needle settled a hair above zero. Something changed, and the sign was simple. Less harm. Rod closed, silent approval. A pulse rose from the back door. The lower room sped up for a beat. Shelf 21 answered, a thin cabinet of religious seals and civic contracts, now listed together in one tongue. That mix meant the top wasn't just pausing or pushing decisions, it was changing their tone. A death order might now carry a clause to keep a corner of memory. That hairline gap is where human names live on their own terms. Danger peaked. The archive's central heart core jolted, the signal that an outside command wanted the archive to sacrifice, lose files, lose tools. A cold current rose from below, wrapped the core, softened the hit. Sacrifice postponed. Tiny win, big bridge. The auditor glanced at the pillar, let go of mental weight, like the math itself granting quiet credit. Behind the wall map, fine veins swelled and faded on the logistics grid, drawing small crescents, possible decision rooms. 3 crescents glowed with light dust. 3 crises had shifted tone. Not salvation, but 3 in 20 is still the window where, centuries later, new air gets in. A small box on the map blinked. If the grains start slipping from your hand, it's also your job to polish the hand. A line of self-care entering the Bureau's charter. A cloud card slid out of shelf 27 on its own. These caches could be killed at any time, normally permission required. The card offered itself. Its back felt like moonlight on sand. He flipped it. Not a list, a story, about a scribe who didn't dodge the stain but turned it into the first line of a new law. No names, but every breath in it felt like his. He closed it. The grit softened. The archive was choosing a new tone. An outside notice dropped. In 9 days, a hard audit, margins, light dust, unregistered seals, all to be caged again. Cyrus drew a hair-thin path under a shadowed ledger, straight to the lower room. The water raised a ripple. 3 dim maps appeared on the wall. Workarounds for keeping soft lines alive on hard paper. Microprint below sight. Heat-pressed memory marks from the scribe's own skin. Shifting the air ratio behind shelves so a stamp lands a fraction lighter. Nameless tricks. Effective. The red emergency strip buzzed. Invisible files were spilling from an unknown section, records that never existed, but whose effects already did. Forgetful decisions. Cyrus rubbed 2 more. Grains awake under his seal and traced the air. The unseen files sighed and made a shelf for themselves, visible now. Risky, but safer, because without real visibility, memory stamps always bully. Inside, his heart stumbled, then smoothed. His palm warmed. The lower room hummed a hint. Fatigue in the writer must be counted too. If the hand tires, the powder fails. Fresh hand isn't a slogan. It's daily maintenance. On the water, a small circle showed the mark for rest. In the archive, rest is a sin. Here, it's a duty beside duty. He matched his breath to the scent rhythm. The room brightened. Win enough for now. On the stairwell, the audit board's date slid from 7 to 9 days. 2 more files got time to breathe. No big order, just a tiny change in scribe's cadence, putting a soft letter on the big clock's tongue. The auditor read, loosened his shoulders. One of those who knows and says nothing? That quiet permission was the first human scent in the machine. In the charm room, rarely opened, chains hang not with file titles but with scribes' names, to save the hand when disaster hits so the voice of the writing survives. Today a new chain hung. No name, only an unregistered seal and a dust speck. Not one person's mark, an oath of a shared hand. The Bureau's unwritten warrant fixed in the building at last. He touched it. A faint music rose, echoing maybe a child's bright palm print somewhere under a red sky. Outside, brown smog had been heavy for weeks. The archive's air sensors drew a special map, never logged, showing factory fatigue crusting onto the city and onto the writing. Heavy buildings make heavy pens. The lower room accepted the map and added a micro-clause to margins. Count the air, too. Fatigue isn't just human, it's urban. Looks silly on paper, but it can tip a closing file from erased to saved. Then a person, not a thing. The junior scribe with the self-written line stood in the pillar's shade. Not tired, curious. Questions are forbidden, so he asked with his hand. He dusted a margin, then placed that same hand on Shelf 9's crate. The crate recognized someone else for the first time. When recognition becomes habit, institutions change color. Cyrus stored the sight in his chest. Not every touch becomes tradition, but when it does, libraries become cities. The last turn wasn't an ending, just the knock of the next beginning. The hard audit would come in 9 days, with iron molds in tow. But a soft tone had already soaked through layers. The lower room's pulse was steady. The water glowed with double-edged light. The Zero Bureau felt as light as paper and as firm as law. Cyrus scraped one final grain under his nail and set it where the old clock's shadow rests each day. It would live with time, not any file, slowing the hand a hair when the audit arrives, just enough to make iron remember it used to be human. The archive breathed. Not earth dust, light dust. Cyrus straightened and pocketed the thought that every 2 minutes another knot would open, another turn would appear. But now, behind each turn, a shared hand would keep fatigue from becoming law. The top will come, weigh, and question. The room below will flex its heartbeat. And in between, one palm will lay the same margin line in powdered light that keeps a file human. Fatigue is a penalty, not a law. And when the lawmakers themselves get tired, tradition carves its new clauses by hand. The glass dome above the archive swapped the inside moisture with the fog outside, and the faint glow in the ceiling vanes flipped direction. Morning didn't arrive. Time did, then paused. In that pause, the audit team's footsteps slipped in without sound. Paper fibers tightened, cabinets straightened, and the heart pillar let out one careful beat only trained ears could sense. Cyrus Anil felt the dry line of light dust under his palm and knew the first hit would be by the book. The real strike would come after. An extra tool came with the audit rod, a thin line of some unknown material they called the Standard. It measured tone, heat of the text, breath of the scribe, damp of the margin, all into one invisible number. It drew a circle in the air. A coolness slid into the archive. A polite, unaware fragrance followed. That charm was a trap. The lower room of Zero Bureau rippled tiny rings on the water, telling him, "Keep lips shut, keep breath steady, don't let your rhythm turn into talk." The Standard didn't touch Shelf Nine's crate first. It scratched the living veins behind the wall map. The map pushed out 3 crescents toward the dome. They opened and hung like small fans, showing the hidden side routes that sneak soft lines onto hard paper. Exposure felt like defeat, but the dust grain under the clock's shadow woke up. The hand slowed by half a breath. The crescents stayed half open. Half-open routes are ambiguity on paper, and ambiguity gets delayed, not punished. Delay was survival today. The hardcore jolted again. A faint warmth reached the junior scribe's pen. His hand, without meaning to, made an extra margin mark, tiny but measurable. The Standard stared at it. The needle tipped a hair positive. The auditors' faces loosened. That slack was the archive's air channel. Cyrus glanced at the apprentice's shoulder and knew the tradition now had 2 hands, not one. With 2 hands, the scale's tongue doesn't vanish even in a crowded hall. Inside-out light flashed. A thin breath in the back room's wall turned into glow and wrote a number on the water, never seen before. Not math, memory interest. It said, "Decisions bought with a coin of forgetting can only be paid back with interest in remembering. Forgetting adds debt. One day you pay principal and interest, price of kindness, clear as day." Cyrus put his palm on his chest. His heart answered, "Don't ignore it, but don't turn fear into a habit. Soft is a craft, weak is not a law." The old recorder behind the dome switched on. It captured silence, trapped air, pen scrape, clock stutter, double light on the water, all onto a hidden strip. The audit team passed it kindly and moved on, not knowing silence strips our primary evidence here. When words are denied, breath testifies. Cyrus closed his eyes and stored it. When iron molds return, this silence will prove the soft line is not a trick. It's breath. Orders hit. Seal shelf. Nine's crate. Quarantine the black book. Remove the new chain in the charm room. 3 strikes at the archive's spine. The lower room woke fast. Twin rings on the water. Then a brief block sign. It gave Cyrus a path only a memory seal can read. He didn't hide the crate. He shifted the air mix around it. The seal went on, but the inside stayed soft. The black book went behind bars, but its last gap got a dust dot. The chain came down, but its sound soaked into the pillar and floor as a faint tremor. Seizure showed, effect survived. That's the art and the risk. Factory pulse outside sped up. Brown haze thickened on the windows. Air charts showed the new humidity would change salts in scribe's skin. Heavier pens, damp dust, fatter seals. The lower room added weather fatigue to the algorithm. A tiny margin clause appeared to split rest into fine intervals. The Standard ignored it as noise, but it kept the hand slow longer. 2 more files tipped from deferred to saved. The smog was enemy and remedy both. Human and city fatigue met on one chart. His palm's unregistered seal spoke from inside. Not words, a call. Touch isn't enough now. Own the tone. Owning tone means never making fear a method. He touched the first memory that ever showed him the bureau, the child's bright palm print that survived a seal. The memory steadied his hand. A new sign rose on the water. What's coming isn't procedural, it's existential. Be ready. Existential came. In the auditorium glass, a quiet image floated. The apprentice in a room that doesn't exist here. Walls at angles, tables made of light. A parallel archive above or below, testing this one's tone. Not spying. Exam. If orders came from there, they'd turn softness into doctrine, a weaponized kindness. That was the real danger. When grace becomes rule, everything else looks harsh. He'd have to stop that. The dome's silence recording reached audit ears. They paused their review for 12 hours. A gift. Time to reset breath. The lower room brightened. Thin lines of light raced across the water. A hairline channel opened behind every shelf. Dust grains started stockpiling there, food for letters to resist. The first full breath cache formed. The review returned harder. The standard hit the root of the text. One font, one margin, one spacing. Even average pulse of the scribe standardized. Uniformity can be order, or an axe. The lower room held, but the water's light spread thin. This is when softness goes ceremonial, and perfume turns to stink. Cyrus chose open defiance, without breaking the frame, save the tone. First move, at the black book's last gap, he laid silence, not a letter. When it opened, the last line was a pause. The calculator swallowed a half zero. In math, that's a grin. In control law, it's a skip. The standard couldn't catch it. 3 files slipped through. Proof that inside the rules, a pause can be law, if it's lived as breath. Betrayal flared. An old scribe stole dust from under shelf 15, thinking softness is personal salvation, and the archive is a mask. He wrapped the shimmer in cotton and walked. The lower room jolted. The water went bitter. The heart pillar drew a heavy breath. Cyrus watched the vanishing hand and wrote, inside, the forbidden line. Softness isn't private, it's shared. The traitor's dust went blind. His hand's veins numbed. The dust, scorched, didn't shine. He could write again, but the paper would not accept him. The archive showed its immune system. New rule cut deeper. Hand's heat now recorded. Temperature, pulse, skin moisture as metrics. Looks technical, feels like a leash. If the institution owns the heat, it owns the hands. The lower room answered non-technically. Pulled moisture from walls, spread it in the floor. Palms found their natural warmth again. The metric logged but didn't capture. Sometimes nature sits in half shade, and that's where escape grows. An old crack in the dome let light out. The city haze sent back a faint glow. Not pomp, permission. Factory fatigue linked with the air claws inside. When public weariness and institutional gentleness share one chart, decisions come from pens and from air. 2 doomed files were nudged to delay by the weight of the air ratio alone. Delay became usable capital. The old clock Cyrus had slowed stopped dead. Audit ordered a shiny, ruthless replacement. The lower room laughed, drew 3 rings. The new clock's shadow fell into the old shadow's path. New time, old shade. Files got the same sliver of grace the scribe's lungs asked for. Quiet wind broadcast itself. In quarantine, the black book's final pause opened a tiny window. The parallel archive peered through. Light tables, tilted walls. A small wave crossed and settled on the nameless mark of the chain. A first envoy of tone between 2 institutions. If anyone tries to weaponize softness, that envoy will dissolve the noise and keep soft soft. Then darkness, hard. A hidden squad entered, no badges, carrying a silent knife meant to break the archive's spine, pull the heart pillar, tie the lower room to an external grid, seize all dust stores. Cyrus heard it in the wall's damp. The lower room killed the lights, smoke in the archive's eyes. The squad stepped. The floor drew breath beneath their feet. Their knives lightened a fraction. Cyrus flipped the air around the crate, widened the black book's pause, filled the pillar with the chain's thin music. Blows dulled, no neck cut, just a scraped collar, spine intact, heart its own. The price. The bureau's room removed the tiny seal that kept dust auto-generating. From now on, every grain would come from a hand, not a machine. Necessary. Auto-supply turns into a weapon. Handmade stays tied to breath. Breath isn't counted. It's trained. Cyrus accepted it. Softness would live by labor, not miracle. Miracle gone. Mastery stayed. That's how tradition becomes alive, not magic. The audit ended with a report, tough but not empty. 2 new lines. Seasonal fatigue is a valid factor. Midline pauses are allowed if proven by silence. Those 2 sentences became the archive's future air. The lower room drew a thin, far circle on the water. Light returned to its center. The heart pillar breathed out a small smile. The dome crack kept the fog out. The city sky felt a quiet gratitude. Cyrus set his palm on the desk edge. He slid a few grains under the hall's rim. The apprentice sat in the pillar's shade, smoothing his pen's pace. Behind glass, the black book's final pause had widened a hair. Warmth lingered on the crate's brass from an unregistered touch. The chain's nameless seal held a tiny, flickering envoy light. The old recorder's silence strips had been bound into a new volume, and the lower room's heartbeat now belonged not just to the archive, but to the city. The hall took a long breath. No slogans, no thunder, just the faint scent that light dust makes when the hands are truly hands and fatigue is not a law. Audits will return, new standards will appear, knives will want their shine. But every 2 minutes, the next turn won't be alone. Behind it, a shared hand, a quiet witness, a half-open path, a pause that weighs more than a word, a shadow that lays old time over new time, and a heartbeat that runs from the room into the streets. The archive stitched this into its fibers. The heart pillar eased its rhythm. The new clock made peace with the old shadow. Inside the crate, the stone tablet added a slim new margin. Softness costs labor, and labor earns a place in law. And when law makes room, the Zero Bureau stops being a myth and becomes an institution, still a secret and still a breath. At the last ripple of night across the floor, 3 tiny lamps lit on the lower room's surface. Not names, signs, one for the hand, one for the pause, one for the city. They shared their glow and dimmed. The archive closed its books quietly. The air settled its ratio, and time stopped a moment to see how much humanity a craft had managed to save inside the law. That thin moment between night and morning, when a breath goes out and comes back, the archive shut its doors and pulled all its light into one line. The dome's wet threads flashed once, and the Zero Bureau's room drew the circle it only makes at an ending. In that circle, the heart pillar dropped a heavy beat and scattered its stored silent witnesses across every page. It wasn't defeat. It was inheritance. Now each page wasn't just words, it held breath. The audit didn't return quietly. Their standard line came in jagged, trying to turn the soft tone into a fixed rule, trap pauses in a timetable, and tie the heart pillar to the main grid so the beat would belong to a machine. Not this place. The inner room felt it coming and folded the last dust grains into the apprentice's low margin line. Cyrus saw the hand wasn't his anymore. It belonged to the tradition. The hand changed its stroke. The margin turned like a shoreline guiding a wave, and the black book's pause widened until the sharp edge of the order softened and ran. City smog tapped the windows. Factory pulse synced to the archive's rhythm. When uniformity struck the roots of the text again, the lower room played its deepest move. The old recorder's skin of silence was laid across the archive's spine like a second cover. Now, proof wasn't in letters but in mapped breath. The standard's needle lost its chill on that map. A half zero started to become whole, but the heart pillar trembled it back to half. That half was salvation, the art of staying complete by staying a little unfinished. The hidden squad came one last time. Their knives weren't just quiet, they were numb. Targets, The brass of Crate 9, the quarantine bars, the charm room chain, the dome's old crack. It looked like a full grip from 4 sides. Cyrus put his palm to the floor and sent the beat through it. The echo filled the quiet bowl only the tired but true can hear. At that exact moment, the apprentice melted the dust under his pen into the center margin. The margin opened a breath of space, and the text turned into a tunnel that only opens from inside. Knives came down, but paper turned to glass. Blows landed, cuts didn't. Seizure showed, meaning stayed. With a weighty breath, the heart pillar announced something no one heard, but everyone felt. The archive's beat is now joined to the city's beat. A hand that saves text in here will match the hand that earns bread out there. A pause that becomes law here will be the tiny breakout in the workshop's noise. Soft won't be a weapon. It will be a craft. Not one hand's, everyone's. That knot is what the audit came to untie, and that's where the knot was tied. The dome crack pulled in one last wash of city light, and the old recorder's strips covered the black book like a second skin. The last line's pause held 3 marks, one for the hand, one for the pause, one for the city. When they blended, the Zero Bureau's room erased the ending circle. Erasing wasn't deletion, it was rescue from scatter. Without the circle, the light ran straight. With straight light, the new clock's hand paid its debt to the old shadow. Time finally moved on, but it kept the weight of breath. Cyrus set his palm on Crate 9's brass. Heat rose this time from inside out. He touched the apprentice's head in the pillar's shade and stepped back. Stepping back wasn't vanishing, it was sharing duty. He gave the dust inside him to the room's surface. Auto supply will never return. Every grain will be handmade. Every pause will be tied to breath. That sacrifice is what makes the archive last. The miracle ended. The skill remained. And when skill is tied to breath, the law, sooner or later, makes room. The final audit report came. Tough, but it opened 2 doors. Seasonal fatigue counts as a factor. Pauses can serve as silent evidence. Both lines were entered in the archive's name. The nameless seal on the chain loosened its threads, envoy light still faintly glowing. The black book in quarantine stopped being for reading and became a model. Inside Crate 9, the stone tablet added a new margin. Being gentle is labor. Labor goes on until law is made. Once it is, being gentle is no longer a crime. Night slipped. The hall took one last long breath and dimmed. The dome's wet shine drew a line and vanished. The lower room lit 3 small lamps on the water. They flickered together, then shared their glow and softened. Softer didn't mean gone. It meant kept. The archive closed its books, but the pages kept breathing. Outside, factories eased their pulse a hair. Inside, scribes steadied their hands' warmth. The city felt an unseen hand had left a pocket of air inside all that noise. Morning didn't come, but time started walking. The clock's hand threw light, not shadow, for the first time. The apprentice took the desk. The heart pillar set a lighter tempo. The old recorder wound its first new strip. The black book's pause wrote its name inside the law without a sound. Crate 9's brass learned to stay warm with no unregistered touch. The archive isn't just a building now. It's a code of breath. A code that doesn't turn into a weapon. It becomes a craft not for one, for all. Not an ending, but a link in moving time. Every 2 minutes a new turn, never alone. Behind it, quiet witness, the smile of a half-zero, the friendship of an old shadow, and a shared city heartbeat. As long as they stay together, the soft tone will breathe inside the law, and every hard order will hold a tiny pause in its margin that lets people remain human.